My background, if anything, would be as a futurist. As I said, in 1977, I taught the first course in the United States, and probably the world, on space industrialization and national priorities. In late '89, early '90, I was a member of the Economic Strategy Task Force of the World Federation of Free Latvians, and this included people that Gunārs Čēniņš-Kings, Bīksniņš, and others. My role was to think long-term, and my paper in that, what we submitted to the Latvian Parliament May the 5th, I think, of 1991, was Latvia 2018. And in that paper, I had a significant role for Latvia in space. It's kind of from that perspective that we'll look at this whole issue, as you see in the program, of the role of space science and technologies in national economic development. Now let me find my presentation. So we're going to look at a variety of topics. The chief topic is the crisis of jobs, both in the EU and in Africa. And then we'll look at making space for Africa. We're looking at the new wave in technology with satellites getting cheaper, launch services getting cheaper, and opening opportunities even for a high school to launch a Sprite satellite at a cost of perhaps a couple $1,000s. So this is a new realm. And then we'll look broader at a Japanese proposal on the Shimizu lunar ring, which is actually quite significant. And then we'll look at other issues. So what's the crisis of jobs? Europe is wealthy. We have an aging population. We have a highly developed infrastructure. And we are largely, as is the US and much of the world, faced with a jobless recovery. Poor countries with underdeveloped infrastructure, with an abundance of young people, are faced with the need to create millions of jobs. Now here's a quote from Bill Gates. And there's many papers and books on this topic. Technology over time will reduce demand for jobs, particularly at the lower end of skill set. 20 years from now, labor demand for lots of skills will be substantially lower. I don't think people have that in their model. So this is not limited to people that drive trucks and cars. You know, we got driverless cars, trucks, and other things coming. But then we have massively online delivery of coursework so that you can get coursework from the best professor in the world anywhere. And what's part of this equation is that even now, 83% of the population of the billion people in Africa have the most powerful, they have powerful computers in their hand. They have cell phones with access to worldwide information. So we're looking at a very, very different kind of world than before. Things can be accelerated, they can be scaled very, very rapidly. So this is our problem. We're in the wealthy countries. We have very high levels of productivity already. And we're going to see increasing numbers of jobs replaced by systems, robots, and various kinds of automation. And then in the poor countries, there's low productivity, but we have the same robots and automation and systems hitting them as well. But they face the need to bring their people up, create better jobs. And where is that actually going to come from as we speak now, with professors maybe being replaced by systems coming out of MIT and other places. Now, we also have an environment, and this little pond is supposed to be our environment on this planet. And we've been fishing there. And then we have more, and then we have more, and then we have 9 billion of us fishing in this same pond. That pond is not going to be able to sustain all of us, and we're not going to be able to keep it clean, neat, and able to grow fish and everything else. So we got to look beyond. What if there were an ocean? Okay, this ocean is the ocean of space. There's a vast realm beyond the Earth that can sustain a growing population that needs intelligent beings. And as President Kennedy spoke in 1972, why we go to the moon? We go to the moon because it's hard. Now, when you do something hard, you have to invent new things. And that's why we need to do hard things. Now, it's a hard job to preserve the environment in Africa. And that's very, very important. So that's going to take a lot of brains to do. But space has enough room for all of us. So what are the advantages of space technology for Africa and many other places? It's very highly scalable. You can launch one satellite, it can observe a whole nation or deliver education and communication services to an entire nation. It requires far less infrastructure. The mobile phones do not require wires on the ground. And actually it's much lower cost. So it is the way to go in a vast continent like Africa that has a very underdeveloped infrastructure. And this scalable technology can create high value added, higher paying jobs. Now, Africa, I believe Kenya is the place that developed funds transfer technology for use with smartphones. They, I believe, may have been the first, so there's innovation. I believe Madagascar is one of the world sources of CAD/CAM type of software. They have some leading specialists there. So but space technology has key advantages that need to be considered from an economic development standpoint. So what are the applications of interest? Well, you've heard them so far, and this is from a list from the African Union. Remote sensing, navigation and communication, the natural resource management. We have a very severe desertification problem. Climate change, which is a very serious problem now that I think it's the west shelf of Antarctica looks like it definitely will be sinking into the sea and raising the sea level by, what, 5 meters or something. Food security, defense, peace. Now this is an interesting thing, and this is where my connection, I suppose, with Africa in this case came up, is on the peace and security. And it was George Clooney, I believe, and has supported a satellite to observe events between nations in Africa to contribute to, I suppose, conflict resolution. So what are the issues we face? Funding, the availability of technology, and the availability of expertise. We do have a significant body of expertise, as speakers have indicated, in our region and in these key areas. We have universities. In the city where I live is Yalgava. The university had an enrollment of 12,000. I believe now it's about 6,000 and maybe going down. There's room for more. Now, let's look at options and opportunities. I mentioned swarms of satellites. Google is looking at launching 250 satellites. I mean, back initially, launching one satellite was a huge undertaking, billions of dollars and so forth. Google, a company, not a country, is looking at launching 250 satellites to provide high-speed internet service globally. particularly aiming at regions of the world that are presently underserved. Much of this will be aimed at Africa. Let's say if Africa has 20% of the landmass of the world, then out of those 250, we're looking at 1/5, we're looking at 50 satellites will be aimed at Africa. So what I'm saying, here may be an opportunity to leapfrog and say, let's got to deal with a Google, saying, okay, you're going to do those 50 satellites, but give us those 50 satellites not just to deliver the internet services, but to use for all the other things we have to do. Let us truly indigenize the satellites aimed at Africa. And now we can say, we can help you do that because we have the skill set in our region here to help folks in Africa indigenize and make these birds a lot more useful. So this may be sort of a, but there's many more opportunities than that because launch costs are going down and the costs of doing these things, the skill set is broadening out so we can build satellites to a degree anywhere. We have, is Paul, you've been here? Okay, we had a satellite launch from Latvia to 60 kilometers, I believe, which is almost space. And this was done by a volunteer group. They had a camera up there and you can actually see the video. So things can be done on a low scale. So what I'm looking at here is the idea, again, of the European Union and the African Union looking at space power. So we work together to accelerate things in both regions. Now, so it's a global project with local action. So is it thinkable for the African Union to partner with a Google? But there are many other options. This is just one of hundreds of possible examples. So involved the universities, business in both Africa, our region, to indigenize the satellites, develop education for space technologies, and make a proposal and see what they respond. So, and then the whole nano satellite industry is an emerging industry that's going to be huge. So there are opportunities, it's something new developing. Folks aren't there yet, so we can be there together to make that happen. Now, let's see, come on, where are we here? Click. Seems to be stuck. Microsoft PowerPoint is not starting, not working. Okay, we got to get into the next slide. We got to call Microsoft. The next slide has a small film. Okay, that's probably what the darn thing's gotten confused. All right, so it's restarting. The National Development PPT. Okay. All right, so we go down here. Slideshow for Christ's sake. Worked in the office. I've got PowerPoint 2013, so that may be the problem. I could go out to the site, basically, or I think I'll skip the slide. We can talk to it. Darn it. This is also Windows 8, which is a problem, maybe. All right, we'll skip that slide. there should be no reason why I can't show. Basically, what the video was about. Was showing a brief video from the Japanese company Shimizu, and this company has proposed building a power plant on the moon. They do these kind of things. Shimizu company proposes such things. But in this case, you're looking at a band of photovoltaic cells, 400 kilometers wide, around the equator of the moon. Now, a very significant fact of the moon is that the same face is always towards the Earth. And then one part of the moon, half the moon is always in darkness, okay? But if you have a band going around the moon, you can retrieve energy. And the amount of energy that could be retrieved from this band is sufficient to meet all terrestrial needs for energy. Okay, we're looking at the delivery of a constant 12 terawatts of power from the moon. So in this particular slide, we're looking at a 2030 forecast of 17 billion tons of oil equivalent. Well, whatever that means, you can see over on the other side of the slide where you got, unfortunately this doesn't come out strong enough, is we can replace all these, the nuclear, the coal, the oil, gas, hydropower from the moon. When you do the 12 trillion terawatts of power, what you're delivering is 105 terawatt hours of power per annum, okay, which exceeds the 35,000 terawatts of power that's forecast for total global demand. So that would generate, at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, would generate $12 trillion of revenue per annum. Okay. Now, if you can say, well, maybe it'll cost $20 trillion to build the darn thing, the numbers can be calculated, and this actually could make sense by 2030, 2050, because there is no carbon footprint. The energy comes via microwave, possibly laser from the moon, and it's built from moon rocks, okay? Because all the materials to build photovoltaic cells and other materials exist on the moon. So once you build the robots to build the things, you can build this, and your incremental costs will be actually nominal. So it is, and here you got the constant terawatts. This is the world energy consumption by region forecast to 2030. Now, if we could expand the infrastructure in Africa faster and the living standards rose more, then the pinkish band, which is the Middle East and Africa, would be much broader. And so we're looking at electrical power demand. The lunar ring generates 105,000 terawatts per annum, while the total global generating capacity forecast by 2030 is under 30,000. So this is, again, this is something that will face great difficulties. However, let's just look at, here again you can see the moon, you can see the Earth, and you can see the delivery of energy. There are many other schemes that have been proposed, having satellites in geosynchronous orbit and others. So this is factories in space, people living in space, doing things in space, relieving the Earth of environmental burdens of drilling for oil and burning fuels. And here you can see some diagrams of this band on the moon. And lunar soil is ceramics, glass, oxygen, concrete, and much more, titanium, helium-3, and other materials. So we're looking at, right now, the International Energy Agency is forecasting that by 2050, using conventional technology, we will have to invest close to $100 trillion to meet demand. Okay, and that's coal, nuclear, gas, wind, terrestrial, solar, hydro. So how much the Shibuya lunar ring would cost, we cannot really forecast. My gut feel is it'll be less than 100 trillion. So we're looking at a possible revenue generator. And here's another, this is just a pathway of space technologies where they're leading. Is this thinkable? Where you have a partnership with this big company and saying, hey guys, we understand you'd like to actually build this. Right now, it's impossible to build this for you because you're just a construction company. You need rockets, you need many other things. We'll consider working with you. We'll work to take steps to make this happen, but you invest maybe $2 million a year starting now, starting today, so that we can build up capabilities to think about this, to develop the engineers, and so forth. Maybe they would say, this is a good idea. It broadens opportunities in our countries. So one aspect of all this is there is a treaty called the Moon Treaty. And to do things like this on the moon requires that countries agree. Because at present, treaties say that no country can have sovereignty over the moon. No company can own the moon, and so forth. That's the present. But there is a provision in the Moon Treaty that says that countries can work together, the parties to the treaty, to establish what's called an international regime. And the international regime is like any other thing. How do people work together to get a job done? There's an international regime in the oceans. There's an international regime in the International Space Station, how countries work together. I believe that an international regime could be formed that would accelerate development of the moon, accelerate development on the Earth, and accomplish both. But there are some interesting facts about the Moon Treaty. It's been ratified by only 16 parties. Other treaties of similar nature are ratified by over 100 countries. So the Moon Treaty looks defined as dormant. But it's also been signed by France, India, and Romania. It was killed in the US Senate by mining interests and libertarian groups that said there should be no hand of government on their activities in space. So there's a key provision in the Moon Treaty, though. It says, the provisions of this agreement relating to the moon shall also apply to other celestial bodies within the solar system. This means that the treaty actually, if it were ratified by enough countries, would govern all subsequent development in space. Okay, but right now, parties say that it's dormant, inactive, and they're trying to build ways around this. If you can snag an asteroid, process it, and nobody complains, you establish a precedent. If you establish enough precedents, you don't need the Moon Treaty. Commercial interests can strictly exploit whatever they want. And that's the pathway that things are slowly going, is to set up those precedents. But we can stop that without creating a bureaucratic monster, which was one of the fears. So what if Africa ratifies the treaty? There would be 71 ratifying countries. It couldn't be ignored. And Africa would be at the table. The policy issue would be addressed. And then you got the AU, you got small countries all over the world that probably want to be at the table also, instead of things being decided by a few corporations and others. So I think there is a possibility here. I'd like to return again to President Kennedy's speech in 1962. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, because they are hard. Innovation comes from doing things that you haven't done before that are hard. And that's what we really got to look at doing. So there we go. If we do what's easy, stay in the same small pond or stay in the same ballpark, we don't really have to innovate that much. We do apps on smartphones, but that's not quite innovation anymore. And if we don't innovate, the robots will do everything that matters. There will be few well-paid jobs, and the dream of Africa achieving a middle-income, middle-class, upper-income status for all its people will not be possible. So here we got the little pond again, and there we got the ocean. So we must venture in the ocean of space to survive. But there's a statement by Carl Sagan: you don't need to go to Mars to cure cancer. So we got problems on Earth we got to address them right, and we got to address them fast. So space is not, of course, a total answer, but space is a big part of the picture.